I will call to order the Airport Commission meeting of March 19th, 2014. Roll call, please.
Bruce Miller,
Here.
Kirk Martin,
Here.
Craig R. Curry, Patricia Griffin, Carl Hopkins, Karen Kahn,
Here.
Jim Wilson.
Here.
All right. Thank you. Do we have any changes to the agenda?
No changes, Mr. Chair.
All right. Thank you. Public comment. Any member of the public may address the Airport Commission on a subject within its jurisdiction. We have 15 minutes. Do we have any speaker slips? Anybody jumping to the microphone? All right.
No speaker slips.
Okay, thank you. Notices that the Budget Subcommittee and the General Aviation Subcommittee met on Thursday, March 6th in the Airport Administration Building, and those items will be further in the agenda. And that on Thursday, March 13th at 5 p.m., the Airport Commission Secretary duly posted this agenda on the bulletin board. And minutes. We have a recommendation to waive the reading and approve the minutes. Do we have a motion to approve?
I so move.
I second.
All right, all in favor of approving the minutes?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, the minutes are approved. Thank you. The consent calendar, do we have any changes to the consent calendar? Removals? Nope.
Now, Jeff is here. Jeff McKee is here in case you had questions on the IPM report.
Oh, I thought, you mean we don't get a, I had noticed, I was assuming we were getting the usual multimedia presentation. Oh.
No.
Any questions on another fine job of assembling that very vital report? We do like to make fun of it, but I do, honestly, we appreciate all the work that goes into it, and it's really important for protecting our environment. So, all right. And let the record show that Commissioner Griffin has arrived. All right. Okay. Any questions on the integrated pest management report? All right. We will accept that report then. And so, do we have a motion to accept the consent calendar?
I so move.
Second.
All in favor of the consent calendar?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Thank you. And again, thank you for that fine report. Liaison reports. Do we have our City of Santa Barbara liaison? No, but we do have our City of Goleta liaison, Mayor Michael T. Bennett. Good evening.
Do have a couple of things to report. I was just at the ribbon cutting tonight for Deckers with their grand opening of their facility, the official grand opening. They've actually been there and occupied for a bit, and their store is now open, and got to see all the little goodies that they have for sale in their retail operation. So that was kind of exciting. Some things that might be very important to the airport users. I'm sure you're well aware of our closure at Los Caneros, and that you can't get on the southbound on-ramp going towards Santa Barbara at Los Caneros in the 101. And there was a bit of a glitch with one of the subcontractors, as unfortunately happens from time to time. And as a result, what was supposed to have started weeks ago when the barricades were first put up hasn't started yet, but I've been assured that tomorrow morning it will begin. So the process of demoing the overhead over the railroad will begin tomorrow morning on the first half of the project. It's expected to take about 18 months, but that's not the bad report. The bad report is that Caltrans, and you may notice some work that's going on along the shoulder between Los Caneros and Fairview, they're going to be in the process shortly of moving the southbound freeway to the northbound side so that they can enlarge the San Pedro and Vegas Creek drainages, so that we won't have the floods that we've had in the past that occur on the freeway and then back up in Carreal and up Vega and Carlo and Valdez. So that'll be beginning of a new project that Caltrans is running, and that should start within the next 60 days or so, so I'm told. And that will continue for another 18 months, up to 2 years. And initially, the off-ramp at Fairview will be closed, and the northbound on-ramp going north at Fairview will be closed. and those will be closed probably for the duration of the project or a good portion of it. So just letting you know, things are going to get a little tough to get around these parts, and it will have some effect on the airport because if people are used to taking Fairview to get to the terminal, that's not going to happen. So then in order to do that, they'll have to get off at Stork Road. I've been assured that the proper signage will be in place, explaining to people that where the off-ramps are and where they're not, and so on and so forth, with flashing signs, etc. But I just thought I would let you know, and if you have a means to put out information to the folks around here, I would highly recommend that you make contact with our PIO at the city, who can give you all of the press releases and the information to assist you in providing that information to the people that it'll be affecting here. So that's the biggest thing that we've got going on, and thank goodness the Hollister Bridge project, which is the second phase to the San Jose Creek project, which is going to finish on the 31st of this month, won't begin for a while longer, so we won't be narrowing Hollister Avenue down to one lane in each direction too soon. So just thought I'd pass that on as well. So that's my report, and unless there's any questions, I'll go ahead and sit down.
Sounds like it's a good time to reconsider driving cars. Right?
Yeah, it's a great time to take the bus, bicycle, walk, other alternative types. Carpooling is a wonderful idea. And we're working with our business community also to consider staggered times of work, both coming to work and leaving work. So that's something we're just on the front end of trying to work with our business community, but I just throw that out there too, because that may be a helpful possibility. If we can just stagger even a half hour, we're being led to believe this would be a tremendous improvement opportunity to help reduce some of that congestion. So I'm optimistic we'll have some success there. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Okay, brings us to commission matters. We have a recommendation that the Airport Commission adopt a change in the regularly scheduled meeting time from the third Wednesday of the month at 7 p.m. to 5:30 p.m. I think you've all received material on the meeting times of the other city commissions and boards, and the airport, I think, is unique in being the latest in the day. I'm sure there were historic reasons for that, but it has been suggested in order to reduce overtime and so forth that it be moved to 5:30. Do we have questions on that item?
Comment. Some of us do have career positions in other portions of the vicinity, and 5:30 would bring particular hardship to be here or here on time
Okay.
if it were moved to 5:30.
I know there was also discussion of it perhaps being at 6 o'clock as being less of a issue for people who might need to get here from downtown.
And I was only responding to the fact that it says specifically 5:30 here. I don't know if that is the only recommendation, or forgive me for not
Yeah.
knowing firmly.
It was up for discussion, and I know that 5:30 or 6. My concern was also 5:30 might be difficult for anybody getting here from downtown or parts further.
Especially considering what our liaison report was.
Right, that too.
Get out here
yes.
early.
So, at 5:30, 6 o'clock, do we have other?
Is the major reason for overtime?
I think there were a number of reasons, one of them being that it does end up going fairly late sometimes.
Mhm.
And-
Well, I'm certainly in favor of moving it to an earlier time slot, because it's been, in the old days, it was at noon at City Hall, and I'm not sure how I got moved to 7 o'clock, which is kind of a little cumbersome, but
Yeah, I personally think starting on the hour may be a little easier. 6 o'clock. Do we have a motion? And
Does-
that motion could be for a different time?
Does staff have another input as to what they would see as the pros or cons of moving it to 6 versus 5:30?
I don't believe there's that much of a change. I mean, 6 o'clock would certainly be good for staff as well. If it accommodates commission schedules, that would be good. Not sure about going back to lunchtime, but
Downtown.
One of,
Right,
one of my other concerns about having it at 5:30 was, I was wondering if that gave our fine audio-visual crew time, if you had meetings in this room up till 5 o'clock for them to get set up.
true.
If we were to point out to the public, number of staff that are actually here at the meetings are generally how many that are, we would be considering?
4, 5, 6. 6 airport staff.
So 6 airport staff times a couple hours of overtime would make a major impact on budgeting and things like that. If we were to start at 6 o'clock, we would shave virtually an hour or 6 hours of payroll, perhaps more, off of that overtime. So there would be benefit to the city budget and that sort of thing. So obviously, we all in this room probably realize that, but I like to point out the obvious to
Thank
the
you.
public.
Thank you.
Of course, some of you all are exempt, I'm sure. You just got to
Don't,
work.
we just have to, yeah,
Hang
we
in
don't.
here. Right.
Managers don't receive overtime, of course, but
Right.
I believe 6 o'clock would be much more doable than 5:30 from a personal standpoint.
Do we have a motion
No,
to
I would
move
move that
to?
we change the meeting time till 6 PM.
Do we have that seconded?
Second?
Right, all in favor of moving the regular meeting time from 7 PM to 6 PM?
Aye.
Aye?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. We are thus moving to the meeting time from 7 PM to 6 PM. Thank you.
we'll have that be effective with our next meeting.
Perfect.
Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. I do have one commission matter, but I can add it to the end, which is just a report on today's semi-annual meeting of all the boards and commissions, which there's always very interesting items, but as I said, I can move that after the director's report.
Unless, if you'd like to do it now, that's fine too.
I could do it now. I can
Don't
just
make us wait,
Run
please.
through. I know it's riveting.
Please.
Okay. So as I mentioned, twice a year, all the chairs, vice chairs of all the city parks and our city commissions and boards do meet just to provide an update to each other. Identify any topics of potential mutual interest, and there's usually a host department which kind of provides more insight on what their department does. This meeting was Parks and Recreation. Just to throw out some trivia here on Parks and Recreation, they manage 43 parks and sports facilities, 11 community buildings, 23,000 street trees, 9,000 park and facility trees, and 3.5 miles of beaches. I thought you might be interested. They are also undertaking several renovations projects and energy efficient lighting, and they are slowly recovering from the kind of their downsizing that they had to undergo through the leaner times. Many commissions do report, but I'll just a couple of the highlights. On the topic of downtown parking, it did kind of initiate a whole discussion on a new signage initiative that the city is looking at to help, among other things, help visitors find the parking facilities, but just in general, facilities in general. The police dispatch is moving into the Granada Garage, hopefully by the end of the year. A big item or topic is, of course, water. As probably everyone is aware, we are in a drought situation. It is expected that in the next couple of months, the City Council will probably declare a Stage 2 drought. The Water Commission is working on a drought water rate program. I think you could probably all guess what that would mean. Measures to encourage conservation of water. And unless something unexpected were to change in the remainder of this year, they would expect by next October, the beginning of our next water year, that Gibraltar Reservoir would be empty, and that Kachuma would be at about 1/3 of capacity. So unless something changes next year, this is a pretty significant problem. They are already looking at having to add pumps up at Kachuma to pull water out of there. And the reclaimed water plant is out of operation now. So that is adds to the issue. So it's a very serious issue for the city. Planning Commission is working with the city on an overhaul of zoning ordinances. That is a 2 to 3 year effort. An interesting note from Single Family Design Board. There are still 30 parcels that have not been reconstructed after the T fire 5 or 6 years ago. And they are looking at trying to, one, better understand why that is, and two, what they can do to help restore housing. I mean, even in our community, losing 30 dwellings is kind of has an impact both on our community and also tax revenue. Let's see. And as many of you know, there has been several city executive changes. We do have a new city attorney, a new public works director, and it was mentioned that they're expecting to start recruitment for the airport director in the next few months. And I think that's most of the notable items on the commission and board update. If you had any questions on that.
Thank you, that was very thorough.
Okay, thank you.
And thank you for not making us wait.
Okay, I know it's okay. Administrative reports. Goleta Slough mouth opening. We have a report.
Yes,
Thank you.
I've asked Andrew Vermont, our project planner for the airport, to give you some background on the opening of the slough mouth, how it has been done historically, and what we're going to do in the future to try to maintain the mouth being opened and tidal flow for the slough area. So this is Andrew Vermont, please.
All right. Thank you, Hazel. I'll just go ahead and start right in. Last month, the last day of the month, we had a mechanical opening of the slough mouth by the County Flood Control District under an emergency permit. And I found online this little video of the minutes following that I thought would be a nice sort of first step in describing what happened and what it looked like. So as you can see, there's a lot of sand scour. That mouth is growing by the minute. And we've got kind of class 5 rapids, if you will. So how did we get to this situation? I'll start with a little bit of background, and I'll talk about the role of the Flood Control District in the slough mouth, and what happens when the slough mouth is closed for long periods of time. We've got the risk of flooding and increased bird strike hazard, as well as an increase in our mosquito population and sort of an undermining of our tidal restoration projects. And then I'll go over the conditions that led to last month's breach and what we're doing about it. So for reference, that video was from that location where that little arrow is pointing. That's the Goleta Slough mouth. It's off the east end of the Goleta Beach parking lot. And while the Goleta Slough is a small portion of the airfield, we think, it actually is the bottom of a very large watershed system that stretches from Painted Cave to Broadcast Peak, covers almost the entire city of Goleta and all the way out to La Cumbre. So when the mouth is open, we've got this nice sort of wide estuarine delta. When the mouth is closed, you've got a big, what we call a sediment berm, but it's a sandy beach. Starting sometime in the 1980s, no one's quite sure when it began, the Flood Control District started maintaining the slough mouth within 2 weeks of its closure. So they do that once or twice a year on average. And they did that at the request of the Department of Fish and Game because they were concerned about oxygen levels in the slough getting so low during the summer that we would have large fish mortality. So they had taken it on as a resource protection measure, not strictly as a flood protection measure. In 2012, they applied to renew that permit, and the National Marine Fisheries Service requested a lot more data about how that activity in particular affects the endangered steelhead trout, which is a nationally endangered fish that is present in the Goleta Slough. The Flood Control District found that that was a very sort of expensive and time-consuming request, and that because they were doing this mouth management to protect fish and not strictly as a flood control measure, they pulled that activity from their permit application. So in the year and a half or so since that occurred, the airport has found a number of impacts that I'll get into, such that we've contracted with a consulting firm to do some biological assessments and surveys to address the National Marine Fisheries Service concerns about endangered species. And we're going to work together with the Flood Control District to renew that permit process. This is not an easy process. It'll take pretty much this entire calendar year, and it'll cost about $250,000. But those are the particular species of concern there, the steelhead trout, the tidewater goby, and building savanna sparrow, which are the fish are federally listed endangered species, and the bird is a state listed. So I'm not a hydromorphologist, but I'll just kind of say basically what happens is the sediment builds up slowly in the summer when we have low water flow, and then in major storm events, you'll have a blowing open of the slough mouth with a flash flood. The trouble that we have is we don't have a lot of record of that happening in Goleta Slough because we have this long history of it being mechanically opened. So we don't know the conditions in which that occurs with a lot of detail. We had this sort of long experiment last year up until February of this year, almost a whole year, where the mouth was closed from March 2013 to February 2014, and it never breached. The first time we had to pull an emergency permit was in December of 2012. This is when we found that the slough water level was getting a little high, so we called the Flood Control District, as we did on occasion, and said, hey, maybe we should go take a look at the slough mouth and open it. And they said, we can't do that anymore. We don't have a permit. So the airport department applied for an emergency permit on their behalf because we were particularly concerned about flooding at the airport. We obtained those permits, and with the Flood Control District, we had a mechanical breach on December 1st. Now, in May of last year, we had a multi-week siphon project where we installed an 18-inch pipe in the slough that went over the beach parking lot and had an outfall on the beach. We did this because we found that we were having a dramatic increase in the number of birds, particularly migratory fowl, which are our high-hazard birds, ducks and geese, and we were worried about aviation safety. Never before has the Army Corps of Engineers issued a permit because of potential for bird strike hazard, so we're groundbreaking in that regard, for whatever that's worth. But we were able to obtain that permit. We did the siphon instead of a breach because the resource agencies concerned about the endangered species felt that was less impactful. So I'll talk a little bit about the BASH risk. This is the FAA refers to bird aircraft strike hazard as BASH, quite ominously, I think. They almost entirely occur near airfields on takeoff and landing. That's where the aircraft are the lowest. Ducks and geese, which are our high hazard species, are second only to deer nationally for severity of strike. And they can cause, in rare occasions, catastrophic accidents, but even minor damage on occasion is impactful to both safety and the operation of aircraft. Here's an example of a bird strike, in case I have not driven this home. This is a commercial aircraft that had to return after takeoff because they had hit multiple birds, and down in the lower left-hand corner you see the pilot and passengers discussing the situation, and there's one poor bird that didn't make it through the landing gear. We also had, last summer, a surprise mosquito infestation. We had a 100-time increase in the number of mosquitoes in the Goleta Slough. The Vector Control District has traps they put out every summer, and traps that normally collected in the teens were collecting in the thousands. It was a significant increase, and because it's adjacent to UCSB, which is a school, a major public health hazard. So the airport department, because it was on airport property, contributed an additional $75,000 to the Vector Control District in order to abate that hazard, which was no small undertaking. It required the use of a helicopter to do aerial treatment. Also, you may recall we had a tidal restoration project a number of years ago. We did 13 1/3 acres of wetland habitat where we had restored connectivity to the tidal creek, so that instead of having seasonal wetlands that attracted large migratory birds, we had tidal wetlands that attracted local shorebirds, which are not only smaller, but less likely to incur on the runway. This was not a small undertaking. It was a multi-year effort, required a lot of local and federal dollars, $3.4 million in total. With the mouth closed, every portion of the slough functions as a seasonal wetland. It's standing water. It's much more fresh water than saline, and it becomes a large sort of pond that may attract migratory fowl. So I went over all this here with the increase in the bird strike hazard and what we had to do there. So here's a little picture of the inlet and outfall of the siphon. It was an interesting experiment, but it was not a terribly successful one. It moved very slowly. It needed to be reprimed almost daily, and ultimately the ocean decided it didn't like it and broke the end. So there's the outfall turned about 90 degrees from where it had been installed due to wave action. Now, flash forward to last month, we had our slough water level gauge showed the table there on the right that we'd already had what I would consider high water at about 6 feet above the mean low tide line is what that references. And then we had 2 overnight rain events that increased the water level to about 7 foot and then about 9 foot. And we had a forecast of another inch to 3 inches of rain over the weekend. So the Flood Control District actually called me this time because they'd been getting calls from residents and business owners in Old Town Goleta who were concerned about standing water and some of the roads being inundated and that they may have some major property damage. So I took some pictures because I knew this was going to be interesting, and these 2 pictures were taken at those particular points. The top one is when it was at 7 foot. It's already a lot of water. And then the 9 foot one was the highest I've ever seen it. It looks like a lake. You can barely make out where Teclatito Creek is in the middle there, just the tops of a few bushes. So we were lucky in that we didn't have as much rain as forecasted. I say that we were probably the only ones in Santa Barbara County who felt that we were lucky in that regard, because we were inches away from closing the airfield. We weren't the only ones, as I mentioned. Obviously, there were other modes of transportation that were impacted by the flooding. This bike path is not visible. But there were a number of facilities at Goleta Beach that were also in a lot of water. So finally, at 11:45 in the morning on February 28th, the Flood Control District got a phone call saying that they their emergency action was approved, and within 5 minutes they'd opened this 1 bucket wide channel that quickly expanded into what we saw in the video. And following that, we had this huge drop from 9 foot to 3 foot over the course of an afternoon. And then over here on the next day, this was probably our most severe storm when we had the damage to the piers. It got all the way up to 7 foot in the slough. But then, because we had an open mouth, as the tide changed, that all drained back out. So I believe there's a substantial flood benefit to opening the slough mouth, personally. And this is what the slough looks like now, and what I think those of us who go out and look at the slough periodically are familiar with. So our next steps here in the airport department are to wrap up these biological studies that we have under contract, update our wildlife hazard management plan to address the kinds of hazards that we're discovering in this change of condition, and work with the flood control district to implement a new adaptive management strategy that will involve probably a good deal of monitoring and experimentation and consultation with the environmental resource agencies to make sure that we can achieve our goals without causing significant environmental impacts. So if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Otherwise, that concludes my presentation.
Just a couple questions on the siphon project. Is there necessity to permit to do that?
Yes, that was also done under an emergency permit.
So there's really no difference between the emergency permit for the opening of the slough from the siphon?
The regulatory process is the same. It was simply that the resource agencies felt that we'd had a sieve on the intake end, and also a cage that would exclude both debris from clogging it, but also from taking in any sort of wildlife.
Right.
And they felt that was preferable to just opening the mouth and causing a huge flushing.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And secondly, you were discussing bird strikes, ducks and geese, second to deer strikes, I believe.
Nationwide, that's correct. Yes.
And are there a lot of deers that strike planes?
On takeoff and landing, especially in the Midwest and the North, it's a significant hazard, and it can cause.
Well, I wasn't
it can cause
sure,
a lot of damage.
And thank you for bringing that up, Commissioner Miller. In particular, around December, I'm sure that could be an issue. But
Flying reindeer.
Thank you for clarifying.
Mostly sightings as opposed to contact.
So you mentioned the study that the airport is funding for that, and are there additional studies anticipated that would have a budgetary impact, or is it the hope that that's going to be the what's required?
I think it's reasonable to assume that after we've acquired permits to do a maintenance program, there will be an ongoing monitoring requirement that will require the additional spending of resources in one way or another. How that will play out between the airport department and other interested parties is an item to be determined in the future.
So are there any hurdles remaining other than just going through the process? You're completing the study and going through the process that you foresee that will keep this from happening? I mean, it sounds as if this is something that's kind of in the best interest of certainly the area.
Well, I think that the principal interest hurdle is that we need to do a lot of data acquisition at this point. I can be quite optimistic because I can imagine what the results will be of the reports, but I don't know that until we've actually done the field surveys and done the analysis of levels of water level, salinity, oxygen levels, and the impacts to the portions of the slough that are critical endangered species habitat, to changing those. I think that there will be an opportunity to identify a Goldilocks zone where we can lower the water levels to avoid the hazards as they impact the airport, while still sustaining the habitat that the endangered species need. But my optimism isn't yet supported by science. We still have to do that work.
And
So I'm
then,
assuming this takes constant monitoring.
It will take a lot of monitoring this year just to compile the reports necessary to reopen the permit process. The ongoing maintenance requirement, I don't know what we'll do in that case. It's premature to speculate, I think.
and obviously, we're in the third driest year on record, so the monitoring from this year is going to be uniquely different than that of a more rainy season or an El Nino season, which is predicted for next year. So are those permits something that take a lot of time to get? For instance, as we move into a more rainy season, is that something that would be anticipated and in the plans?
The National Marine Fisheries Service would prefer a multi-year effort rather than a single-year effort because of, they can account for anomalies such as weather. Because of the fact that we're, currently experiencing impacts, we've pushed back on that and really tried to make an effort to make the survey period as short as possible so that we can move forward.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other question? Okay. Well, thank you for that report. Item 9, fiscal year 2014 federally funded projects. We have
Yes.
a presentation.
As Commissioner Chair, tonight you're going to hear kind of a summary of budget and impacts and federal grants. We're trying to give you all of it at one time. And I'll just preface the whole discussion with the information that we received regarding the reduction in air service with American Airlines restructuring and not going to Los Angeles 4 times a day. So that came very late in our budget planning process. Actually, we had about a week in order to redo the budget. So tonight you're going to hear several new ideas for the airport and some old ones at the same time. So we're going to start off with Andrew giving you some background on our Airport Improvement Program grant and then also our planning capital improvement program with FAA. Andrew?
Thank you. So, as Hazel mentioned, there are 2 separate programs that really relate quite closely to each other that I'm going to be discussing. One is the Airport Improvement Program, which is administered by the FAA under the Airport and Airway Improvement Act, and the other is the Airport's Capital Improvement Plan, which is an FAA requirement for airports receiving AIP funding in order to identify and prioritize nationwide the spending of that grant money. I have presented this to the Airport Commission in years past. I want to go over a little bit about what's changed in the Airport Capital Improvement Plan. We're projecting a reduction in our entitlement money in response to our lower employments in the future due to the loss of American Eagle. We have delayed a few of our pavement projects because they have really lasted better than we may have anticipated, so we're realizing a savings in that regard. We've also identified a few environmental projects that we need to address. The Wildlife Hazard Management Plan, which I mentioned in the previous presentation, and the Taxiway Hotel NEPA review, which is the sort of the design and the environmental review of the concept of extending Taxiway Hotel all the way to the Runway 7 threshold. So I'll start with the capital projects for this fiscal year that are currently in the AIP grant process. The first and by far the largest is a pavement project. When I said that a lot of our pavement was doing well, not all of it is. $2.8 million we'll be spending on pavement roughly in the vicinity of the terminal, as well as a portion by Signature, which is probably in the worst shape. And we'll also be doing a seal coat on runway 15 left. As I mentioned, we are doing an update to the wildlife hazard management plan that costs about $100,000 to prepare. That's principally in response to the changes of conditions in the slough. That's not just the slough mouth. We've also had a number of restoration projects and the creek relocation since this was originally done. So there are a few other things that it's really sort of in due anyway, but this is a really good opportunity to do it this year. We're also acquiring some lighted X's. Our existing ones are not the most reliable, and we use those to close the runways for either for construction or whatever the need is. So the later projects, those appear in the airport's capital improvement plan, and these are subject to change as we identify new needs in the future, but this is sort of the forecast that we give to the FAA about what we anticipate coming down the pipe. We're looking at upgrading the airfield lighting in 2015. We have a lot of power loss due to old wiring. It's very exposed to both fresh and salt water. We really need to pull out that wiring and put in something watertight. As I mentioned, the taxiway hotel extension design is a part of that phase. That's $750,000 to do design and federal environmental review, and that's just the design and environmental review. Once we get that, this is sort of the plan to plan, because once we get through this, then we submit it as a capital project again. So this is going to be an ongoing multi-year effort. We have other GA pavement that we're identifying in sort of our outer years at different prices, basically, dependent upon what we have the ability to fund. Also, in 2016, we're proposing to finish the realignment of Taxiway Bravo. It has a little dog leg south of the terminal that has been identified by the FAA as non-standard and needs to be corrected. In 2017 and 2018, I have the Taxiway Alpha and Runway 725 rehab and overlay, both of those probably about nearly $3 million. And in fiscal year 2019, we're looking at that we'll likely have a need to upgrade the security systems, particularly in the terminal, but airport-wide. And so I have this sort of dream of a future where we'll use our phones to access. I don't know what it'll be like, but that's an outer year project. And this is the attached summary that came with your memo. It basically is each of these projects and the years in which they'll occur. And I've broken it out between the AIP funding, which is 91 some odd % of the project, and then the local match, which is 9.3% or thereabouts. So that concludes this presentation. If you have any questions about those projects, I'll be happy to answer them. Thanks.
Just probably an obvious question, that your projections into 15, 16, and so on, are those inflated dollars at those times?
No.
No, they're not. They're based on current dollars, and also our AIP entitlement estimates imagine a sort of a 2% growth of employments year over year. Trying to adjust for inflation in a 5-year plan is sort of challenging. These are order of magnitude figures anyway. We know that they're likely to change.
In addition to that, the FAA actually provides the grants based on bid. So we have to go out, complete the design, do the bid documents, solicit bids, and right before we award a bid, that's when we identify the total dollar amount and go to FAA for the grant.
So that would be current day dollar. Then
It's
at
current
that
day
time.
dollars.
Yeah, that's correct. So we know with quite a good deal of certainty that these numbers are wrong, because we
Well,
will be getting bids
I
and
wouldn't
correcting
say
for those.
wrong.
Imprecise,
It's
let's
It's
say.
important to know that the adjustments are made down the line and
Mhm.
that they're real figures at that point. And thank you for clarifying.
So I realize 2018 seems like a long ways away, but really not. With runway 725 being vital to our commercial aviation, how how is it anticipated that be dealt with? Is it going to be just done in the middle of the night, or in small sections, or?
Would we, Tracy, you can answer.
Yeah, it'll be done in the middle of the night, opened up again in the morning, and it's an unfortunate way to have to do it, but there's construction companies out there that have done it a lot, and you know how it goes. You do a little section, pave it over, it's ready in the morning, and then you do that every night. I've done that a couple times, and now and again there's a delay in the morning, but usually it goes pretty well.
Any other questions? All right.
Great. Thank you,
Thank
Andrew.
you for putting that together.
Okay, as we mentioned earlier about new fees and new sources of revenue for the airport, the first one that is on your agenda next is a recommendation for fiscal year 2015 that the airport adjust our aviation fuel flowage fees for Jet A from 5 cents to 8 cents and for establishing a new fuel flowage fee for commercial service airlines at 4 cents and maintaining Avgas at 5 cents. Tonight, Rebecca Fribley, our property management specialist, will give you a presentation on the fuel flowage fees.
We currently have 3 fuel providers: MAG Aviation, which has a self-serve Avgas tank down near Hangar 1, Signature Flight Support, which provides both Avgas and Jet A fuel, and Atlantic Aviation, which provides Avgas, Jet A, and currently has the contract to fuel the commercial airlines. All of these agreements contain a provision that allows the airport to adjust the fuel flowage fees effective any year on July 1st. Our current fuel flowage fees are 5 cents per gallon of fuel sold regardless of the type, and have been in place at that rate for more than 35 years. We have had several industry surveys over a period of time that have shown us that our fuel flowage fees are below industry standards. A 2009 survey of 30 airports showed an average fuel fee of 6.4 cents. A 2012 survey of 34 airports showed an average fuel flowage fee of 7.9 cents. And 14 airports that I surveyed in the last 2 days had an average flowage fee of 9 cents per gallon. Also, in the industry, more and more airports are starting to charge commercial air carriers. In the past, that had not usually been the case. In the 2009 survey, again, there were only 4 airports that charged commercial carriers, but by 2012, there were 17 out of the 34 that charged commercial carriers, and in the airports that I just recently contacted, approximately half of those that had commercial service were charging something to their commercial carriers. They are quite frequently make a difference between signatory and non-signatory rates for fuel flowage. A signatory carrier is one that has signed an operating agreement with the airport, and a non-signatory is exactly that. They do not have a signed agreement and work on kind of a month-to-month or an incidental basis. So as you can see, the differences in the rates amounts anywhere from, it's considerable. It could be anywhere from 4 to 5 cents difference per gallon of fuel sold. Currently, MAG Aviation, based on our most current complete year, pumped about 54,701 gallons. Atlantic, 70,135 gallons of Avgas, and Signature, 72,555. And Jet A, MAG Aviation does not carry Jet A. They pumped 1,135,586. Signature, 1,682,244, for a total of 197,391 gallons of Avgas and 2,817,830 gallons of Jet A. And the significance of this is that the Avgas sales at this airport only accounted for 6.5% of total fuel sales in 2013. We did not, in 2013, have a fuel flowage fee for commercial carriers, so they were not reported for this period of time. What we're proposing is that we leave the avgas fee at 5 cents per gallon sold, and that we increase the Jet A to 8 cents per gallon sold, and institute a commercial carrier fee of 4 cents per gallon sold. If we do that, based on the forecast number of gallons we believe we'll be selling in the coming fiscal year, which has been adjusted for the loss of American Eagle service, we're anticipating a net increase in revenue of $88,125 for non-commercial fuel, which would be both the avgas and Jet A, and an additional $107,791 approximately for commercial carriers, for a total of approximately $195,916. The impact on our budget, as I just mentioned, would be to increase the total fuel flowage revenue by more than $175,000 for fiscal year 2015. The General Aviation Subcommittee has reviewed the proposed changes to the fuel flowage fees on March 6th and recommended approval by Airport Commission. So our recommendation tonight is that Airport Commission approve fiscal year 2015 aviation fuel flowage fees of 8 cents for Jet A, 5 cents for avgas, and 4 cents for commercial carriers per gallon of fuel sold. And just as a point of information, right now Ventura Airport has a fuel flowage fee of 6 cents for both avgas and Jet A. San Luis Obispo has avgas at 8 cents and Jet A at 11. San Jose currently has both avgas and Jet A at 20 cents per gallon, and Oakland has it at 21. So we feel that these rates are really quite reasonable, and are hoping that Commission will concur with our recommendation.
For 35 years, we didn't change the rate. Apparently, at 35 years ago, we were gouging or way ahead of the industry standard, and now we're well behind. Was there a logic to not changing it over that 35 years?
Well, I think at this point in time, we're looking for additional revenue that we really didn't require at that period of time, so there was no pervasive reason to have to raise those fees. At this time, we have our shortfall from American Eagle, and we're looking at possible sources of revenue, and this was one that was identified as being an area in which we were lagging behind industry standards and conceivably could make a few additional dollars.
And how often will this be reconsidered? On what type of basis?
It'll be looked at annually. Part of the discussion that you'll hear in the rates and charges presentation is that the commercial carrier rate will be reviewed annually. That was one of the things the commercial carriers asked us for. The others will also be reviewed annually, but it'll probably be another 35 years before we get around to changing them.
Probably
again.
not. No.
We're not going to be there.
I probably will not be on the commission either. Thank you. At that, we're still coming in well behind some of the other comparable, as you mentioned in your report, and by the way, a fine report. And the logic at keeping it the same for 35 years and being behind the current rate, could you enlighten us on that?
It makes a considerable difference on the size of the airport, the number of projects. San Jose, for example, just built a new terminal. It differs from airport to airport and how it's implemented. Some airports exclude certain types of aircraft. If they're over X number of pounds, they get a reduction in their fuel flowage fees. If they're If they pay PFCs, they may be exempt or get a. It's done very differently from airport to airport. But the majority of airports are definitely higher than we are for both Avgas and Jet A. Now, that's not true of some of the general aviation airports. There are some, like one of the ones that we got a response from is in Kenai, Alaska, and they charge 2 cents, but they're right near the pipeline. I mean, so
Again, right from the
it's
source,
kind
yeah.
of all over the board. But as a general rule, we are a little bit low at this point. But we didn't feel that our Avgas customers could sustain a large jump at this time, and the difference in airports that charge a different fee for Jet A versus Avgas is about 3 cents.
Just to add on to what Rebecca said, I think historically, her point's well made. We didn't require the increase in fees that could be generated from fuel flowage fees because we had commercial industrial properties and other options that the airport she's mentioning don't have the same that Santa Barbara has. But in the situation that we're in right now, we went to the table to look at any fee that we could come up with so that we could generate the revenue we need to stay self-sustaining. So that's why.
I strongly support that. And from a user standpoint, I think it is very valid also, Rebecca, that respectfully, we should look at this on a more regular basis so it is not so dramatic to the users. I'm compassionate to that. I would rather see a gradual increase or keeping with the market standard, probably not once every 35 years. So in recommendations to future commissions, I would hope that we would review that more frequently.
We will do that.
Well, I think, too, what we saw was that, these rates kind of follow market trends of other airports, and it's pretty clear that there was kind of an escalation throughout the market for some of these, for some of the very same reasons. So I don't think it's necessarily the case that, 35 years ago we were gouging, but, it's driven by various forces.
It would seem that from a philosophical viewpoint, we would want to minimize our costs to the users and keep them as low as we can, commensurate with a solid financial position for the airport, and not worry so much about what other airports are doing. We have a bottom line that we've got to maintain, and our revenue has to support that. But the revenue at the lowest level to support solid finances should be plenty.
Any other questions or comments on this item? So it has been recommended that we approve effective, I believe that would be July 1, 2014, starting our new fiscal year. Jet A flowage fees of 8 cents a gallon and 4 for commercial carriers, and no change in the Avgas fee. Do we have a motion?
I would move that we approve.
Second.
All in favor of the proposal?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. It is approved. Thank you. And item 11, airline rates and charges for fiscal year 2015.
Thank you. I must say that when we had the meeting with the airline property representatives, they arrived within a week of the airport receiving word about American Eagle discontinuing those flights. So you can imagine it was a lively discussion that we had, and also very supportive. I want to put that in because the representatives were very supportive of Santa Barbara, of what we're doing in the market that's here. They recognize that. Unfortunately, they negotiate rates and charges for leasing space and using the airport. They don't do routes and route planning for them. But it was a quite lively discussion. And once again, we had, our staff had put together rates and charges prior to American Eagle, and right before we were to send them out with prior notification to the manager, the property managers, then we had to pull them back and redo them based on the revised proposed budget that we were coming up with. So tonight, some of you have seen this before, and I don't want to bore you with it, but we'll give you as much information as we can about the establishments of these rates. We, when the airport came up with, well, not came up with, but when the airport was developing the new terminal, we knew we were going to have bonds that were going to be required to assist in financing. And so in preparation for going to the agencies for the bond monies, we had to come up with a financial feasibility report as to how can you pay for the bonds in the long term. So in doing that, we came up with a methodology to charge the airlines for building rental, landing fees, and boarding bridge fees. So the airlines currently still operate under annual permits. They really do not like long-term agreements. And quite frankly, there's not a lot that you get from a long-term agreement with an airline these days. But our agreements talk about the rates and charges for the terminal space, the landing fees, and we also talk about some operational issues and some security issues as well. The changes, I don't want to beat this to death, but the changes, 13% of the total passengers or enplanements that we had prior to April 1st were from American Eagle's activities. So we're in losing that, then we had to reevaluate the other carriers and their routes and load factors. So overall, we have a decrease of 2.6% in calendar year 2013. We had an average load factor of 77%, which system-wide is considered really good for all airlines. 2008, we had 6 carriers and 12 nonstops, and as you can see, with bankruptcies and mergers and reconsolidation, we're now down to, in 2015, 4 carriers, but we still have the 6 nonstops because while American's not flying to L.A., United continues to fly to L.A., and that's helpful. When we set the methodology up, we wanted to identify all of our direct and indirect expenses, and we do that for operation, maintenance, and capital improvement. It does include the debt service and also our pledged passenger facility charge, which is the second half, pretty much a half of our debt service payment. And we also have to maintain with the city our annual reserves for economic uncertainty and for future year budgets. That totals about 25%. So we take our total budget and we look at that, and then we say, how do we spend that money? And 30% of it is allocated to the airfield. As you can see, 55% to the terminal. The boarding bridge, because the airlines requested that, is a separate cost center, and we look at direct costs and the debt service associated with that. And then commercial industrial, about 10%, and then parking and streets and infrastructure is the last 5%. So when we come up with the rate, we take the total cost for the terminal based on our allocations, and then we start reducing that cost by the revenues that we generate. So in this particular case, we reduce it from revenue from the rental cars and from our concessions at the terminal. So once we reach the $7.1 million, then we take the total square footage in the terminal, the 67,586, and divide it into the 7.1. So it came up with $106 per square foot per year. So we met with the airlines and negotiated a rate of $94 per square foot annually. So that would generate revenue for the airport, all things remaining the same in that assumption, of $2.3 million. What we don't get between the 106 and the 94, that negative amount is carried forward and added into the landing fee calculation. On the boarding bridge, as I said, it's actual cost of $37,000 a year for maintenance contracts and custodial and electric. And then we have our proportionate share of debt service. Then we take that dollar amount and divide it by the number of turns. An airplane pulls up, offloads, and loads, that's a turn. But with the reduction of American Eagle, 4 flights a day, that pulled the turns way down to where we started with about 4,000, and now we're down to 2,748. That turned out to be $90 per turn. And there are lots of discussion at the table, but they asked for it to be calculated this way. And so they accepted the rate as we presented. So that would generate the $247,000. Now, on the landing fee, remember I said there was a negative from the building, so we've added that in. But then we take, with that cost, we take the whole budget, and then we start reducing with any other revenue source that we have not already used. So we take commercial industrial revenue and non-commercial revenue, and then we even take what we're projecting for the airline terminal building, rental, loading bridge, and the new fuel flowage fee, which they agreed with. So we get it down to $1.3 million, and then that dollar amount is divided by the gross landed weight that we project based on flight schedules that we know today. So once we divide the 1.3 by the 388,000 per 1,000 pounds, we came up with a landing fee rate of 352 per 1,000 pounds of gross landed weight. It's currently 346. And I was saying, well, we can just do 350, and they said, no, let's do 352. We don't want to carry another negative forward to the next year. And so I said, okay, fine with me. So it's 1.368 is what we should, if all things stay the same right now, we would receive in landing fees for our budget. The airlines also, as Rebecca indicated earlier, they said, what's the penalty if we don't sign the permit? And we laughingly said, well, as long as you pay the rent, it's, you haven't signed it for several of them. United hasn't signed in years, and American Eagle hasn't signed, but they pay the rent on every month and have never defaulted. They said, well, it's hard to get agreements signed in our process through our organizations unless there's a penalty. And so they recommended that we establish a new provision to cover non-signatories. So if they don't sign, they pretty much told us to put in the penalty to be, as a minimum, 25% increase in cost, up to 50%. So we're going to write it in, and surely they'll sign the agreement. I can't imagine going back and upping the rates 25%, but if that's what's in the agreement, that's exactly what we'll do. And then we also proposed the fuel flowage fee, and there was some consternation about that. But then they kind of leaned back, understood why we needed a touch more money to balance the budget, and just requested that should we get more flights, a new carrier, that at least on an annual basis we evaluate, and if we don't need it, then we don't use it. So with that said, we had concurrence from the airlines for the fees and the rates for 2015. Is there more here? Oh. Yeah. So, as I said, we met, actually it wasn't the 10th, it was the 6th. We didn't get that one changed. But we do have an agreement, and we will be submitting it. Tonight we submit to you the rates and charges. The next slide, Ms. Mabel. The changes. For the airline terminal, it'll go from $87 to $94 per square foot per year. Boarding bridge fee from $56 to $90. Landed weight from $3.46 to $3.52. And a new fuel flowage fee of 4 cents for the airlines. As you know, a lot of people say, well, how do your costs compare to other airports? and you don't really look at the cost as much as you look to the cost per in-plane passenger, what the airlines actually pay the airport for each passenger that comes through. And that ratio will increase as our costs go up. It will also decrease with increased passenger, but it'll also increase with decreased passengers. So our rate in 2009, when we did the bond sale, we were projecting that's when we had more routes, more carriers, more activity. It was at $8.95. For 2013, it was $10.32, and we're projecting now in 2014 for year end it would be $10.67, and for 15, $12.69. As we do, we took the proposed airline rates and charges to our Airport Commission Budget Subcommittee on March 6th, and I believe there was a recommendation to forward it to Airport Commission for approval. Be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
This looks like it was a very successful negotiation. Congratulations.
Just to comment that the airlines are extremely cooperative and giving to us in the process to gain the signature and the assessment of the penalty, and I applaud them in this and like to give public credit to them. Oftentimes you hear of larger companies or airlines or automobile companies not being honest with the public, and here is a reversal of that where they're being very accommodating to us and helping us with the process, and my hat's off to them.
It was a successful meeting.
So you alluded to this. How does that rate stack up against competing airports?
We were substantially below Sacramento, San Jose, probably Orange County. But, you know, as I said, it will come down if we have more passengers. And it's dramatic the way that happens. But they recognize that right now, with a projection of no change, that's what it is.
We need more seats.
That's it. And they control that.
Right.
So,
Other questions, comments? All right. We have a recommendation to approve the airline rates as proposed.
So moved.
Second?
All right. All in favor of approving the rates as presented?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. The rates as proposed are approved. And now, item 12, proposed operating budget for fiscal year 2015.
you're going to meet a new staff member if you have not had the opportunity. Tom Bullers is our new administrative analyst one, and he joined us January 13th, the day that we had the budget kickoff meeting. So he has played an instrumental role in pulling all of this together a couple of times and making the revisions as we need. And so with that, I'd like Tom to do the budget this evening. If there's questions that are historic, I'll slide in and comment, but otherwise I'll have Tom present the budget.
All right,
Thank you.
great to have you here.
Good to be here. So I'll just go over the outline real quick. We're going to talk a little bit about the department generally, our budget balancing strategy in terms of the loss of American Eagle. Really, that's kind of the big challenge that we're facing this next fiscal year. Briefly touch on revenues and expenditures, and then talk about our key program objectives. So our mission statement, as the Tri County's region's airport of choice, Santa Barbara Airport will be self-sustaining, exceed expectations for safety and quality service, and meet the air transportation and economic development needs of its customers and partners. Good to keep in mind. Importantly, we are an enterprise fund, so we have to be financially self-sustaining. Any revenues, anything we're going to spend, we have to bring in. We generate our revenues from tenant rents and user fees, and we don't use any local tax dollars. We have 8 major programs, all running the gamut from marketing and communications to facilities maintenance, everything that you need to run and maintain an airport. Next fiscal year, we'll have approximately 55 and a half employees. You can see split among our different programs. Maintenance, certain ops, and security, the big chunk of employees in those programs. So on to the budget. Our budget goal was really to develop a balanced budget that incorporates the changes in air service. Again, American Eagle. Our assumptions for the budget, about 13% of our passenger traffic and related concession revenue would be lost due to American Eagle leaving. We assume continued economic conditions, especially in terms of interest rates, rental properties, etc. We looked at cash flow projections, maintaining current levels of service, which we'll talk a little bit about, and proposed fee changes. So what do the reductions in air service really mean for the airport? We estimate for the airport operating fund close to $800,000. This is if we maintain 2014 rates and lose American Eagle, and about $1.1 million across the entire department when you include PFCs and CFCs. For the budget that we submitted, you can see that we came about $620,000 under our status quo budget in terms of expenditures. We needed to trim our costs quite a bit. And the main strategies that we used to meet those goals was closing long-term lot number 2. We looked at the number of parkers that park in long-term lot 2 and the number that park in long-term lot 1, and there's really slack there that we can move everybody into long-term lot 1 and then it'll be accommodated. We'll keep long-term lot 2 open during peak periods, such as the holiday, Thanksgiving to New Year's period. And by closing long-term lot 2, we netted about $800,000 in savings. Pretty significant. The other main strategy was increasing our fees, which you've heard a lot about. So I won't go into too much detail on that. But again, to reiterate, these are the airline rates and charges. These are fuel flowage fees. And one that hasn't been talked about yet is increasing the maximum daily rate in long-term lot 2 from $9 to $10. That, again, is a little below market. The $9 rate is below market. We're raising that to get closer to comparable airports around the state. It won't affect parking for very much time because the lot will be closed most of the year. This is revenue, looking at revenue for the rest of this year, a breakdown of where we receive our money. When you compare to 2015, it's pretty flat. We're not really increasing our revenue at all. This is projected expenditures for fiscal year 2014. Again, this is going to be impacted by American Eagle pulling out starting on April 1st. You can see on the next slide, again, we're really flat on our expenditures. The big change here is the parking. The special projects item there is where we have the parking, long-term lot parking shuttle service. That went from, in 2013, around 8 to 10% of our budget to 1% now. And just for your note, supplies and expenses includes the engineering and ARF costs, which are also, ARF costs are significant. These are our revenue projections looking out from last year's actuals, what we're projecting in 2014, and what we're proposing for 2015. Again, you see a little increase in 2014, but flat essentially in 2015. looking at our expenditures in the same way. Last year we had a net loss of $600,000, and that's really due to accounting and federal grants. 2014, this year, we show some loss, and that's mostly due to the Goleta Slough management project that we talked about, the $250,000, but we plan to make that up before the year end. And next year we have to have a balanced budget, so zero. Our key performance objectives, updating minimum standards for aeronautical activity. If you want to operate a flight school on the airport, these are the standards you need to meet. They haven't been updated in a while, I think since 2008-ish. Reviewing all of our policies and programs, making them better. In the business and property group, developing special event guidelines. The former director's retirement party was held there. It was successful.
Going to capitalize on that.
It might generate some revenue, but it's a good marketing opportunity as well. People can pull up and see how easy it is to park here and visit the airport. Developing a frequent flyer parking incentive program. Marketing, again, increasing awareness of Santa Barbara Airport. In the facilities program, looking at installing some drought-tolerant landscaping. Again, we're in a drought condition, so it makes sense. Installing a charging station at the terminal, just improving customer service. AOA maintenance, pretty straightforward. Revising our security program, exercises for emergency planning, and in the capital side, completing construction of the runway 15 left, 33 right pavement rehabilitation, starting design for the airfield lighting, and then working on the Goleta Slough mouth and master plan. We met with the budget subcommittee on March 6th, and they recommended that the commission approve the budget as proposed. And that gets us to recommending that council approve the airport department's annual fiscal year 2015 budget. If you have any questions.
Just a comment on the accommodation of the long-term parking to the general public and that sort of thing. Actually, it is to the advantage of the general public that we are consolidating to the local parking, because they do not need to use the shuttle bus. They're closer to the terminal. It's far easier and very, very accessible. And the fact that it will still be available at the peak holiday time. So I think it's important for the public awareness that this actually is an enrichment, enhancement, and an improvement for their ease and comfort.
True. Thank you.
Well, I certainly wanted to commend you all on being so quick to adapt to this rather untimely departure of American Eagle. And yeah, I know there was a lot of work that went into scrambling to get this all redone. So congratulations on coming up with some methods that really have a very minimal impact on the users, the public users.
Thanks, Matt. Thank you.
I think it probably might be wise to at least get the message out there that, I mean, our lot, that lot was running at 65% capacity or something like that, and you're going up to, you're expecting like 85, which just means it might take you an extra 30 seconds to find that empty parking space. So, plan on getting here just a few minutes earlier.
But as we discussed, too, if we need to have the parking
Right.
management company actually direct parkers to vacant spaces
Right.
to increase that turnaround or in and out, we'll certainly do that.
Yeah.
Not to
Thanks
mention
for
the time
pushing it.
saved in the shuttle bus is invested in a leisurely walk through the lush water-tolerant landscaping to the terminal.
He's good.
Good point.
Yeah. Any questions? Further comments?
I would move that we approve.
Second.
All in favor of approving the proposed operating budget for fiscal year 2015?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. The commission approves the proposed budget. And that brings us to the director's report.
Well, not to belabor the passenger report, but you do have a handout this evening. Thank you, Tom. That indicates that for the month to month, we're down 1.2%. Year to date, however, we're positive 1.4%. So that's perhaps a nice way to go into the next month. The only other item I wanted to bring to your attention, the master plan, we have received the revised scope of work for the environmental documentation and the cost associated with that, and it's about $250,000. We have that programmed in our budget, and we'll be doing the amendment to that agreement and getting that onto council so we can get that project underway. Just to remind those listening, there's a semi-annual recruitment for advisory board members, and that is listed here in our agenda. And then one other project that's out there that we've talked about, and that's the study for ARF and possible cost reductions and benefits to the airport and the fire department. We will be meeting with the consultant on April 10th to receive his preliminary report, and so hopefully we will be able to come to Airport Commission, if not in April, then certainly in May with the results of that study. So with that, I appreciate your patience this evening, and am available for any other questions you might have. Otherwise, that completes the director's report.
I did have one comment on the ARF item. I did mention that in my report to the other commissions, and there was interest on the part of the Police Fire Commission to perhaps have a joint presentation. They've certainly recognized the challenges that there have been in maintaining the ARF unit out here. So they would certainly welcome the opportunity to participate in any sort of solutions or improvements. I should say. I wouldn't suggest that there's a problem, but if we could improve that.
Great suggestion.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. We'll follow up on it.
Also, there's been some property improvements to the Woolover Tire Building, and noted looks much, much better.
Thank you. Our staff, I'm telling you, you get a project and they outline what's needed, and then they just go for it. And I mean, in this particular case, there's been a patching and slurry seal and striping of the parking lots. We have a roof repair getting ready to start next week. They went inside the office and the showroom, gutted and cleaned it up, put in a new ceiling, new lights, new flooring. The bathrooms have been redone. The lead-based paint has been removed from the bays. Honestly, it's a completely amazing deal to me to see it. We did a walkthrough today, and Radius Group will be putting up a sign, I believe, in the next week or so. Similarly, we had a company come in and clean the Elephant Bar restaurant over a week's period. And but if you walk in, I mean, the mirrors are shiny, the glass is clean and sparkling, the woodwork, and you know how much woodwork is in there, just smells nice and looks nice and shiny. And signs will go up probably tomorrow on that one, and Radius Group will get that started. So I just have to give accolades to our maintenance staff and our engineers. I mean, they really are terrific, just amazing group of people.
Well, both properties, I'm sure, are move-in ready. So all those people viewing, please get your bids in early.
That's right. Thank you.
Okay, I believe that brings us to the end of our agenda.
It is.
If there are no further comments, we are adjourned.
Thank you.
All right, thank you all.
Good report.
Thank you.